thank you everybody for attending this meetup, this online meetup, and hopefully I'll meet some, if not all of you, during the physical event in Amsterdam next month. So the title of the talk, as you guys probably all know, Overcoming the DevSecOps Imposter Syndrome. It's a great clickbait title, isn't it? As mentioned, I work for a company called Vericode. Brief intro, we provide software security capabilities for both security and software developers. So as mentioned, if you'd like to know more, feel free to reach out to me offline or after the talk, is what I mean. And if you're attending the conference, please visit us at the booth during the conference. Okay, so a little bit about myself. So I joined Vericode last year. So I just recently hit my first anniversary with the company. Ironically, I joined on the 1st of April of all days, right? So it wasn't a joke. It really happened. But prior to me joining Vericode, from a work point of view, I've worked for a number of different organizations, such as, it's all public knowledge, it's on my LinkedIn, so I'll name those companies. So the likes of HSBC, Visa, London Stock Exchange, just to name a few. In parallel to that, about 6 years ago, I also started a community meetup in London called DevSecOps London Gathering, and we're a good few thousand members strong. I'm also involved in other activities, as you can kind of see there. From a certs point of view, I decided a few years ago to embark on the Offensive Security Certified Professional course. It's kind of a hacking course, product agnostic, which was something I really wanted to do. There's nothing wrong with the product centric training courses, but the issue I personally have with that is when the new version comes out, you kind of have to retrain yourself. And so I felt some of those training courses were kind of milking you for money, right? But horses for courses, that's just my view of the world. I have a personal blog site, as shown there. So DSO Training, GitHub.io, where I've got a number of articles relating to the DevSecOps topic. Okay, so with this talk around the imposter syndrome of DevSecOps, I felt it was important for us to really kind of understand how we kind of got here. How, I don't want to spend cycles, or I don't think we within the community or in the industry need to burn any cycles as to what the name should be. So is it rugged security? Is it SecDevOps? Should it just be DevOps? And if that's kind of done well, then security is all part of it. So I'll give a brief history lesson as to the changes or the evolution of security over the last few years, actually the last couple of decades, and similarly from a development point of view. And then towards the end of the talk, I'll share the steps I actually took to overcome my own challenges around this topic and my thoughts around the imposter syndrome. Okay, so the brief history lesson. So around the turn of the century, sounds ages ago, right? Security wasn't a real thing. There wasn't a security industry per se. And then when it started to happen, it was all about protecting the perimeter of your organization. So network security became a thing, and firewalls and whatnot. And then people started to question or try to understand what assets we were trying to protect. And ultimately it boils down to data. So it could be customer data or company data. So depending on what your business is, your data is important. Some of your data is important to you, and some of it can be kind of time sensitive. And so therefore, as part of that, product security became a thing. So in one of my earlier working engagements, I was part of a product security team where I engaged with different projects where they were developing new business capabilities. And so I had to define and inject security requirements and kind of follow through in terms of design and implementation. So back then it was very waterfall approach. So it was like, as you guys, hopefully most of you guys know, it's like, let's analyze the problem, define the requirements, draw out the architecture, etc., etc. Right? It was very sequential, right? So the elapsed time between identifying the problem statement all the way to deployment can actually take a long time. I mean, easily at least 18 months, if not longer, right? So that's kind of like the first segment in this timescale. So kind of moving along into the middle, right? Security became a bit more mature in terms of security became a function. We had the role of CISOs. We started to define different policies and standards, etc. So in parallel to this, from a development point of view, DevOps became a thing. The Agile Manifesto was developed, etc. Software engineering / development became more and more front of mind for people because they were the people creating the capability for business to benefit from a commercial point of view. And so fast forward to the more recent times where we now have this term called DevSecOps. To cut a long story short, I mean, from my point of view, the meaning of that term basically means factor in security as part of your development lifecycle. Now, that's a very broad statement. It can mean a lot of things, again, to different people. But let's just kind of stick with that. Keep it simple. So in most organizations, the delivery key stages in terms of having a business idea or concept and you want to derive business value, i.e. go to market, kind of falls into these 5 stages. So somebody within the business or within the technical team identifies an opportunity and therefore it's a business change that needs to happen. How does that get resourced? So does a new project team need to be stood up and it then lends itself towards the more waterfall approach? Or is it more of a product team where basically a core team of resources are involved from concept, i.e. the business change, all the way to go to market? So there's a sense of ownership with the product approach versus the project approach, where that team would typically disband after the end of the financial year. Now, once you have your resources, you need to kind of translate the business requirements or the changes into some sort of technology. So hence, you need to start architecting this solution. And potentially there's an opportunity for lost in translation between what the business is asking and how it's interpreted or translated from an architecture point of view. And then similarly, from an architecture point of view, all the way to your design or low-level design, there's going to be some compromises that will need to be made. And those compromises could be not just business capabilities or functions, but also security aspects as well. And then once you have designed and you launch your solution, you go to market, what is the posture from a business technical / security point of view? What is the business risk, if any, with what we've actually delivered? Are we going to be able to close those? So this is where we kind of start evolving or getting involved with risk management, etc. Now, taking the early stages of that delivery lifecycle, people talk about shifting left, doing the right sort of security. And so you may have come across terminology such as threat modeling or risk assessment. Now, there's nothing wrong with those terms. But when people start using those terms, and for the uninitiated, you kind of feel that, well, threat modeling, that sounds like pretty hardcore. What does it actually mean? I think I know what it means, but I don't know if I'm qualified to be involved in that. So to overcome some of those stigmas or mental blocks, rightly or wrongly, I came out with my own term. So I've labeled it DSO modeling only because I didn't want to keep writing DevSecOps. So it's DevSecOps modeling. So for me, that's really about understanding or agreeing with the team what are the common terms, what's the common language we should be using as part of this change. And an example of this would be, if you're developing a e-commerce website, you're taking payments, right? You therefore need to comply with something called the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS, right? Within that standard, the technical term for the credit card number, as we all like to refer to it, is actually PAN, primary account number. Now, for people without domain knowledge, you wouldn't have a clue that PAN actually equates to credit card, right? So things like this, we really need to agree within the team. So therefore, when we talk about it from a business point of view, when we talk about it from a technical point of view, and more importantly, when we start coding the variables to capture this value, right? There is some linkage and traceability. So there's no point in calling it PAN in a business document, but calling it credit card in a technical document. And when you start coding it, you're going to use some other acronym. So it becomes a bit disjointed. And the other thing that I've mentioned already, so having a core team. So within the evolution of software development, I believe a lot of businesses have actually taken the approach of having a product team rather than a project team for obvious reasons, and some of those I actually mentioned earlier. But from a product design security point of view, I like to think of 3 different journeys, as I like to call it, that has an impact relating to security. So the user's journey. So the solution that you're actually designing, how should a user be able to interact with that or not, right? So there's the happy path, as in they can log in and enroll and buy something, for example. But what are the naughty things that someone could do which isn't in line with the original purpose of the business function of that e-commerce website? So an example of that would be, in my basket, can I actually put in a negative number for that item? So rather than buying one item or one book, I can buy a -1 book. And what does that then mean in terms of the technology? Does that mean I actually get a refund? So as you can see, that's a potential business risk stroke security risk. And these are some of the things that when you're modeling your solution, you kind of need to think about. Similarly, from a service journey point of view, what I mean by this is if you have different components that makes up your bigger solution, so irrespective of it being a monolith software architecture or microservices architecture, how does each element communicate with each other? What data is being transferred over or passed through? Having that data flow understanding is quite important, because ultimately you are protecting the data that's been managed and traversed through your solution. Now, with any solution, you need to maintain it, operate it. So what is the code promotion model? What is the admin maintenance, access model, etc. So these 3 journeys have not just business technical elements to it, but there's also a security aspect to it that we need to think about. Okay, so principles. So within the software development world, I think the likes of Jane Kim has actually done pretty well in defining some of the core principles behind DevOps. So these have been taken from the 2 classic books within this space, so the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. So in one book, he talks about the 3 ways. In the other, he talks about the 5 ideals as well, in a novel approach. So for those who haven't actually read these books, it's definitely worth checking out. Now, from a security point of view, it's not so easy, right? So you can kind of see like 4 lists, and these are only examples. The traditional principles that security folks have used is the CIA. So it's not the agency over in North America. CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I won't read out this complete slide, but you can kind of get the idea that people have different models in terms of what security principles that they should follow. None of it's wrong, but is that the right way of saying it? Yeah. So what I guess the point I'm trying to say is neither of them should supersede or be the dominant one. I think each one of these have actually a lot of overlap, and the core principles are very similar. I guess depending on where you are in terms of security adoption within your business, within your team, you may relate more to one rather than the other. Taking this further, within security, we have plenty of public standards and benchmarks which we can measure ourselves against. And these are by independent institutions such as NIST, etc., that have produced good artifacts for us to consult, to digest when we're using specific technologies. Okay, so kind of understanding the structure from a business point of view, some of the aspects from a product security design point of view. What does that mean for me in terms of my work, right? So I know being approached by recruiters or speaking to some close recruiter friends, the demand is to be, I want a DevOps engineer or I want a DevSecOps engineer, but personally, is that really a thing? And what do they actually mean by that? So for me, it kind of breaks down into these 5 different domains, and how you actually handle it will depend on what type of person you are. So i.e., do you want to specialize in one particular area, or are you more happier, like myself, knowing enough about each of the domains, but not being a hardcore specialist in one? Personally, I like to, the reason why I like the T-shape approach, as it were, so very broad across many subjects, and maybe have a bit more in-depth knowledge in one particular aspect, kind of hedges my way, because I don't want to back the wrong horse, right? So, for example, cloud's a good thing, but which cloud provider do you actually start specializing in? Is it AWS? Is it GCP? Is it Azure, or something else, right? So these come and go in terms of fashion and cycle. From an engineering point of view, are you going to stick with being an infrastructure type person, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but relating to this domain, you still need some sort of cloud type knowledge as well. The architects are somewhat evolving in terms of their role from my point of view. No longer is it like fluffy clouds and lines joining them, and then it's like, go figure. It's people are architecting, but translating that into more detailed designs as well. So they're kind of following through. So the architectural role has kind of morphed. The AppSec role, what do I mean by that? Does that necessarily mean that I have to be a hardcore coder and know how to hack code and do all that? That's one aspect, but there's also a capability that people need in terms of, right, how do we check for defects in code? And therefore, how do I integrate those security checks as part of the development workflow? So that could be tooling integration or tweaking the rule base to check for certain things. Do I need to use commercial solutions or open source solutions, or a bit of both, right? So all of this needs a good comprehensive understanding. And leadership. Well, there's no point in just having a pool of specialists and there's no team leader per se to kind of be the glue, be the proxy with towards the business and the technical community. I think everybody should have some sort of leadership skills in terms of collaborating and working with others. It doesn't necessarily mean I need to be a team lead stroke manager. Okay, so everybody likes to play with tools, and here's a definition of what cloud native means, right? So this term obviously has been around for a few years now. This has been lifted from the CNCF. So as you can see, I've kind of highlighted some of the terms here. So in one color, it talks about some of the attributes that an environment or solutions should have, and in the other color, the yellow color, hopefully that comes out as yellowish on your side as well, is relating to more the different types of technologies. Okay, so again, this is lifted from the CNCF website. So there are tons of tools, right? I mean, there's so many that you can't really see it. But fortunately for them, they've grouped the tools into different categories, and there is one for security and compliance. A few years ago, they also started to release what's known as technology radars. So, from their survey with their community members, what technologies were seen as being, I'm aware of that, I'll access, I will evaluate it, or maybe trial it, or I'm actually adopting this sort of stuff. I checked prior to this talk to see if there was a more updated version, but I don't think they've continued with this set of activities. Now, from a software security point of view, again, it's not so straightforward. There is no silver bullet. There is no one single tool that does it all. So within this slide, I kind of like to explain how originally I titled this application security, but I kind of felt that again, that was kind of misleading. So I've decided to use the term software instead. So naturally you will write code, right? And depending on the language and the framework that you use, you may introduce some security defects there. And the way to check for those potential security defects in your code, so some people call it first party code, so my code essentially, right, is static analysis or SAST. So within technology, especially within security, we love our acronyms. So static application security testing, or SAST for short. So there are tools, both commercial and open source, to check for those. But not everybody writes their own code, or there's no point in, let me rephrase that, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. So I can use other people's code, right? So there are lots of commonality between applications. So, how do I authenticate using Python? How do I authenticate against Active Directory, for example, right? If somebody's actually created this capability through a library, through a dependency, there's no real reason, or maybe there is, for me to write that capability. Why don't I bring in that library and then call the function, right? So that's other people's code or third-party code. And the security testing approach for this is what's called or known as software composition analysis. I don't know who makes up these names, but this is what it's called. And the abbreviated version of that is SCA. For whatever reason, we don't call it SCAR. So static and SCA are tools or approaches where you can actually assess the code. So from my point of view, that's kind of like the inside out view of the world of your application. Now, when you start your application, when it's in a run state, it'll be useful to understand, as an external person or someone looking at your application or interacting with your application, are there any security defects or issues? And so within software security, we have dynamic application security testing, or DAST for short. So that's kind of the outside in view of the world, right? So, and as coined by, and I forget the gentleman's name, but very famous, but I've forgotten it. Everything is code. And so infrastructure is code now, right? So no longer do you have to actually buy hardware, rack and stack it, stick a CD in. This is kind of showing my age, I guess, and go through that install wizard, et cetera, right? You can now use code such as Terraform or CloudFormation if you're using AWS to define your infrastructure. And in terms of application packaging, et cetera, and the adoption of microservices, software architecture, the likes of containers and Kubernetes, no doubt will come into play. So therefore, if these elements are also code, in addition to my core application, what are the potential security issues and risks there? So we need capability to scan your infrastructure as code, broadly speaking. Okay, so talked about the different testing approaches, etc. Showed you an earlier slide with something that you can't really see because there's so many tools. Some people may refer to external analysts, the likes of Gartner, Forrester, etc. I have my personal views about those, but it's just for completeness, it's worth mentioning it, and you can decide if you would like to use the outputs from these analyst organizations or not. So this is a screenshot from Gartner, and you can kind of understand from an application security software point of view who are the players in the market and what's the feedback that the market are saying about each one of these players. Seems quite hard. Lots of different types of testing, and it's quite a challenge to kind of understand what testing I need to do as part of my delivery lifecycle, as part of my pipeline. I think the term pipeline is kind of overused and misused, but that's probably another talk we can have, hopefully in person in Amsterdam. But the way I like to approach it is to present like a security testing a la carte menu and explain to the development community within your business or within your team, what does each of this actually mean? What are the pros and cons? Because like I said, there is no silver bullet. And therefore you can work out or agree what type of testing you're going to do inline and what type of tests are you going to do out of band. And what I mean by that is, so in my mind, inline testing should be quite specific, relatively fast, right? i.e. not days, right? Or even a few hours, so that I can get that feedback. I'm still in the right mindset to make the correction, whatever that correction is. Let it be configuration or code. And the out of band testing could be, your traditional manual pen testing or the use of dynamic analysis or DAS. Again, I have strong views about DAS. So that's probably another conversation we can have offline. So what did I do? So I think I shared earlier my view around courses. I don't particularly like product-centric courses. They have a place, and I do kind of follow some of those, but not necessarily take the exam at the end to become certified. So back in 2020, ironically during lockdown, and it was an interesting year in terms of my career as well. I felt I needed to. I felt overwhelmed with this space of software security, DevSecOps, DevOps. There was a lot going on, and it's like, how do I actually prove to myself that I know enough in this field? And so I spent the bulk of that year developing this course, originally with the aim to actually commercialize it and productionize it and so that I can make some money. But that didn't happen. But I did go through the complete creation cycle, and I actually test drove this course with some of my contacts as well. It's really difficult to try and crunch a 2-day course in half a day. Well, my throat hurt. But basically, I grouped it into these 8 different sections or modules, as I call it. So layer 8 was kind of my lazy way of saying, right, who are the different players, the people that are involved in delivering a business capability or a business application? The POV, point of view. So for each of these characters, personas, stakeholders, whatever term you like to use, what's their driver behind them? Because understanding that will reduce friction between your collaboration efforts with different teams, different people. And then I spend some time elaborating more on the DSO modeling. So that slide that I showed earlier was just one of the slides for that module. And then visualization. And what I mean by that is you can't correct something if you're not measuring it. So what are interesting metrics, data points that different personas, stakeholders actually need, and also for yourself? And it talks about IAC, infrastructure as code. So, what are the reasons it seems quite obvious now, do I go with Terraform or do I stick with CloudFormation, et cetera, et cetera? And again, what are the potential security challenges are with those technologies? And then from an architecture point of view, not just understanding, the microservices software architecture, but if I do have a monolith and I want to move to a microservices, what's that journey? What does that look like? And is it the right decision, right? So, we tend to have a fashion thing, right? So it's like, oh, containers is really hot from a career point of view. So everything must be containerized, and therefore microservices is the thing. But is that actually the right decision for your business, right? There's no right or wrong. I've actually heard stories where people have kind of moved back after going from mono to micro back to mono. So you see, there is no right or wrong. And then the automation side of things. So that's what I mean by that, or what I wanted to understand is how can we automate at scale? So as an individual or even within a small team, it's quite easy for me to modify my pipeline to incorporate a new capability, let it be security testing or whatever, right? But if I'm a medium-sized or large organization, how do I actually roll this capability out so that it becomes less of a burden for my development team, for my software engineers? That's a challenge that I was kind of thinking about and wanting to address. And then I've used AppSec, so short for application security. I wanted to kind of go through that history lesson that I kind of played back earlier around what does that actually mean, right? Is it just the code I write? But as I said, everything's kind of code now. So we need to understand the complete picture. Okay, so sources of information. So I like to read books or pretend to read books, and I like to actually read at least 2 books at the same time because I get bored quite easily. I'm a big heavy user on LinkedIn, Twitter, not so much. And then I also liked video news sessions. So C9K is one that's on YouTube or Twitch. So that's a weekly video news that typically lasts an hour, and there's tooling demos and everything. So it's a good channel to follow. Well, with all this input, the thing that I enjoy most is when I come across something new or something that I feel I've developed a strong enough opinion, I like to kind of bounce that off my contacts to kind of test my understanding. So can I explain it? Would they have different opinions? And how do I actually have a discussion around that new topic that I presented? Talked about books. So lots of people have asked me like which books, etc. So I've created a blog article, which I need to maintain, which has a list of different books, amongst many other resources within this space. So meetups, conferences, podcasts, etc. The link to that site is as shown on this slide. And as I mentioned, I started a meetup. This is a screenshot of a virtual platform I actually used during 2021 when we were still kind of in lockdown and in-person meetups weren't a thing. But it's worth attending conferences, meetups, etc., like you guys are doing already, to understand what's the word on the street, as it were, right? So these events are great where you listen to speakers, but the hallway engagements and meeting new people, that's where the value add is. And last but not least, it's worth tinkering. Everyone likes to play. So, if you're not familiar with GitHub, create a repo. If you're not familiar with IDEs, pick and choose one and start using it, right? If you're a bit of a geek like me and you like to kind of tart up your terminal, that's something to do as well, right? So just try things out, ask away. There is no stupid question. And so this is my last slide. This is my attempt. I can't draw in like using pencil paper, right? So I've used AI to actually create this of London. And that's the link to my slide, to my personal blog site. Thank you very much.